On June 23rd, 1958, the lead story in the Los Angeles Times was of a tragic rail accident in Monte, Mexico. A passenger train had been derailed on the notoriously dangerous winding mountain track of Cumbre y Maltrata and had plummeted full speed down the mountainside, finally crashing into Maltrata village station. 40 people were killed and at least 80 were injured. One cruel twist of fate served to compound the tragedy. The train knocked down the only telegraph and telephone lines in Maltrata village, and reports of the accident were delayed. The previous year, Time magazine had named the LA Times the second worst newspaper in the United States. Nevertheless, it had the highest circulation of any newspaper based on the West Coast, and many Americans, particularly Angelenos, would have read about the Maltrata train crash in the LA Times on Monday morning as they began their working week. Below the Maltrata train article there lay an intriguing headline: "Blonde woman sought in nurse killing." The disturbing story that unfolded beneath the headline was more local to Los Angeles than the horrific train accident in Maltrata, and it had claimed only one life by comparison. But as with all tragedies, the ramifications would be felt by the survivors for decades. The nurse in question was Mrs. Jean Ellroy of 756 Maple Avenue, MONTE. She had been found strangled to death on Sunday morning on Kings Row and Monte Lane leading to Arroyo High School. The blonde was an unidentified woman Mrs. Ellroy had been seen talking to on Saturday night in a local bar, the Desert Inn. The blonde was wanted for questioning by the police. The story continued on page 2 and did not flinch from the disturbing details. Jean appeared to have fought viciously to prevent her killer from winding a cotton cord on one of her stockings around her neck. Jean was described as having bright red hair, hazel eyes, and was 5'6" tall, weighed about 135 pounds. Any reader looking at the photograph the LA Times printed of Jean would have thought the description did not do her justice. Jean had a dazzling smile and beautiful complexion. She bore a resemblance to the Hollywood actress Jane Russell, a pin-up of the era. It was difficult to believe that the vibrant young woman in the photograph with movie-star looks had been found brutally murdered only yesterday. Next to the photograph of Jean was an equally striking portrait of her 10-year-old son, Lee Earl Ellroy. Unlike Jean, Lee did not smile. He did not seem happy. He simply stared at the camera, displaying a pensive fragility and intelligence. He had, quite literally, a long face. He was strikingly tall for his age. His hair was neatly combed over, and he was wearing a checked shirt that seemed to accentuate his prematurely adult features. Lee had the right to look uncomfortable. The photograph had been taken only moments after he had found out his mother was dead, and he had been surrounded by policemen asking questions and giving instructions. The article further stated that Jean's ex-husband, Armand Ellroy, was not a suspect in a murder. He was questioned and immediately released, as he had been looking after Lee at the time of the murder. Jean and Armand's divorce had been bitter and rancorous. She had accused him of harassment, breaking into her apartment and spying on her having sex with a boyfriend. Jean and Armand were no longer on speaking terms, although they shared custody of Lee. Jean looked after him in Monte during the week, and Lee stayed with Armand in LA at weekends. When Jean told Lee she was divorcing his father, it had shocked the boy and thrown him out of his relatively comfortable existence. It had skewed his perception of his parents, leading him to despise his mother, whom he blamed for the divorce, and idolize his carefree, languid father. As he was later to admit, Lee was secretly glad that his mother was dead. It meant he could leave Monte and live with his father in LA, which was what he had always wanted. Years later, he candidly described his emotional cold reaction to his mother's murder. "I hated her. I hated Monte. Some unknown killer just brought me a brand new, beautiful life." Lee was not aware that his life was about to get much worse with his mother's absence. Rather than free him from her influence, Jean Ellroy's murder would define her son, his writing and lifelong obsessions.